Harry Rothenberg. You're now streaming live on Project Inspire and MindFlex. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to hearing your class.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you and to everybody at Project Inspire. I always appreciate the opportunity. So wanted to talk tonight about Judaism on trial in the workplace, what it's like to be Jewish, or in my case, very visibly Jewish with this fashion accessory on my head, pretty much wherever I go, whether I'm in court or meeting with clients or at mediations in front of judges and defense attorneys and insurance adjusters and the like. Before I get to the workplace, though, I'll tell you a quick story from my youth that I think sets up a lot of my Jewish identity. So I was around 11 years old, maybe 12 years old, and convinced my mother that I was old enough to take my two next younger siblings to 7-Eleven on my own, so to get Slurpees. So she gave us whatever we needed back in the day, $1, $2 to buy a few Slurpees. Had to cross 2 streets, which we did successfully. On the way, I'm wearing my yarmulke. My brother is wearing his yarmulke, and we're with my sister as well. Some teenagers, older, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, start teasing us, and it became obvious that they were teasing us because we were Jewish. And then they started throwing pennies at us, which is very weird. But we made it to 7-Eleven, got the Slurpees, looked, both ways many times on the way back to make sure they weren't there, and we made it home. We got home, and my mother said, how did it go? I said, fine. And my younger sister said, tell her about the pennies. And I was like, just don't, just don't say anything, okay? And Mom was like, well, what are you talking about? I said, all right, there were some teenagers, and they kind of were starting up with us, and they were yelling stuff at us about being Jewish. They were throwing pennies at us. And my mother had a look on her face I'd never seen before. And she said, look, it's, you've heard about it before. There are people that don't like Jews. It's anti-Semitism. And I said, well, why are they throwing pennies at us? Like, what was that all about? And she said, well, for some reason, I never understand. A lot of people say that Jews are cheap. So they throw pennies, to show, the cheap Jews. So I didn't tell her this. I don't know if I ever told her this, or maybe she's heard me tell the story many years later, that I just had the type of personality, maybe because it's me, maybe because I take after my father, maybe because I'm from Philadelphia, that if somebody starts up with me, I can't help it. I want to give it back. But there really wasn't any way I could give it back to these older teenagers, or I would have gotten pounded into the pavement. So the only thing I could think of doing to show them up was that I picked up the pennies and I put them in my pocket, to show them, thinking I was showing them up, when in reality I realized that's why they were laughing even harder, because I had proved their thesis that, you see, those Jews are cheap. Look, he's picking up the pennies. So it was terribly embarrassing. But I remember it's always stuck with me, that horrible feeling of being singled out because I was Jewish. So now let's skip ahead to the workplace. I had taken off 2 years after graduating from Columbia, to get my college degree. I had gotten accepted to Harvard for law school, but decided that I needed to make up my mind about my Judaism, because at the time I wasn't particularly serious about it. I had grown up in an observant home, I'd gone to day school, but at the time I would say that my relationship to Judaism was that I didn't let it get in the way of a good time. And there were certain things that I didn't really know why I was doing them, certain things I didn't do, maybe I should be doing them. So I decided to take off a year with my parents' permission and support, which turned into 2 years in yeshiva in Israel. During the second year, I got engaged to a young woman that I had met while I was back in college, and we got married, and then I started law school. So the first experience I had where I felt that potential conflict between my religion and the public way in which I had chosen to express it and my career could not have happened at an earlier time. And when I say publicly express, I should be clear. I don't want people to think, okay, he wears a yarmulke, I'm a woman, I'm not wearing a yarmulke, or I'm a man, I'm not wearing a yarmulke, but I have, certain rituals that I do. Being Jewish in the workplace can mean a lot of things. It can mean looking Jewish. It can mean having a Jewish name. It can mean wearing a yarmulke. It can mean dressing modestly. It can mean leaving early for Shabbat or for a holiday. It can mean eating kosher. It can mean an unwillingness to do something because you feel it's unethical or immoral. It can mean all sorts of things. For me, it's more obvious because it's visible because of the yarmulke. So first day, first class at Harvard Law School. I am sitting in the class, and Professor Wilkins, young dynamic professor, who's probably now an older dynamic professor at the law school, comes in, introduces himself. He says, how many of you have seen the movie Paper Chase? Every hand in the room goes up. He says, how many of you have read the book 1L? Every hand in the room goes up. Paper Chase was a famous movie, later turned into a television show about Harvard Law School. And the star was this authoritarian, this tyrant of a professor who would humiliate the students. And it was a very popular movie and TV show because what's more fun than watching other people get humiliated? 1L was Scott Turow's first book. Before he became famous as a writer of legal thrillers, he wrote a book about his 1L experience. A 1L is like a freshman in college. It's a first-year law student. And in that book, there were these heartwarming scenes where, for example, the professor would come in on the first day, first class, and he would say to the students, pick 3 students, and he would say, I want the 3 of you to look at each other, because by the time we get to graduation, only 1 of you is still going to be here, because 2 out of 3 are going to flunk out. So we all knew about this. We had read or seen these depictions of how scary it could be at Harvard Law School. And he says, I want you to know, there may well have been a time when it used to be like that here, but it no longer is. We are not here to intimidate you. We're not here to harass you. We're not here to embarrass anyone. We're here to educate you. And at times we may even entertain you. So I want everyone to relax. And you like feel in the room like, okay, that sounds much better than what we've been led to believe. He says, however, we are going to use the Socratic method. It's named after Socrates, the Greek philosopher. I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to call on a guinea pig, a volunteer, and that person is going to answer. Then I'm going to ask another question, so question, answer. And I'm thinking to myself, after 2 years in yeshiva, I thought the rabbis invented that back and forth. But fine, I'm not going to argue. Give credit to Socrates. Great. So he says, okay, let's begin your legal education. And he gets ready to start asking the first question. Now, in college, for those of you who haven't been to law school or to other graduate schools where it may be similar, in college, your first day, first class is a meet and greet. You're not expected to do anything. You come in, you talk about the summer vacation, you go around the room, everybody says their name and where they're from maybe, and what they did over this, their plans, their major. Then you go through the syllabus. There are no serious questions on the first day in college. But in law school, it's very different in that you have been expected to read and brief and be ready to answer questions on 40, 50, 60 pages worth of cases. There were professors, for example, one of my favorite professors, my 3rd year, would walk in. I remember her walking on the very first day. There was no hello. She just started calling on people by name. You may have heard of her. Her name is at the time, she was known as Professor Elizabeth Warren. She has gone on to greater fame. I'm not a big fan of her politics, for whatever that's worth, but I was a very big fan of her as a professor. Fantastic professor. So here he is, Professor Wilkins, about ready to ask the first question. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to be the first dude called on. I've been in yeshiva the last 2 years. I'm a little out of practice in my secular academic career. So I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure not to make eye contact. Because if you look at the professor, when he's asking a question, you look too eager, you might look like you want to be called on. So I am looking down at my notes. No way, no how am I lifting up my head to make eye contact, because I do not want to be called on. And so he starts pacing the room and he says, all right, who can tell me, what did the Smith court say about non-mutual defensive collateral estoppel? And he stops, and I can see while looking down that his shadow is right above my notebook. I'm sitting in the second row in this beautiful amphitheater, and I'm thinking, this might not end well. And sure enough, he says, how about you, Mr. Jew? And it was like the earth opened and I fell in. I'm like, I can't believe he made that whole speech. He's not going to embarrass anybody. And he calls me Mr. Jew because I'm wearing a yarmulke on my head. Like, isn't that discrimination? How's he even allowed to do that? And I'm thinking, like, I don't even remember what the question was. And I'm having a complete meltdown when all of a sudden, the guy sitting directly in front of me in the first row starts answering the question. The Asian fellow, Thomas Jew, J-O-O. Now, I admit that during the 2.5 seconds that it took Tom Jew, great guy, by the way, to clear his throat and start answering the question, I absolutely regretted my decision to be visibly Jewish in my chosen career. I am sure that I was thinking to myself, why'd you have to wear your beanie? You could have worn, I'm from Philly, you could have worn your Phillies hat, your Sixers hat, your Flyers hat, your Eagles hat. What were you thinking? And that was the first and the last time that I ever felt that way, ever in my career. This is going back, that was the fall of 1990. I do not remember even a second's worth of regret over my decision to publicly represent the Jewish religion. So I will tell you that it can lead to certain moments that can be a little awkward, but that's fine. There are all sorts of moments in life that can be awkward. We only grow when we leave our comfort zone. For an example, when I first started work, before I joined the family business representing victims of catastrophic injury, I worked at a big firm. and I was working on a corporate deal. And I realized that I ought to remind the senior partner for whom I was working that I have to leave early on Friday because maybe he's going to need somebody to replace me. So I went to his office. I said it was Tuesday or Wednesday. And I said, I'm working on such and such deal. So I want to remind you that I have to leave early on Friday because I'm a Sabbath observer. He said, sure. What time do you have to leave? I said, well, it's the winter. The Sabbath begins around 4:30. I live in Passaic, New Jersey. So I like to leave myself 2 hours. You never know what's going to happen with traffic, trying to get out of Manhattan. And, I like to get ready. So I probably leave around 2:30. He said, when does it end? I said, it ends about 25 hours later. So it'll be over about 5:30 Saturday night. I can come right in Saturday night and resume work. He said, let me ask you this. I'm thinking that deal, let me see, based on where it is today, I think it'll probably go another few days, and it probably will end this Friday night in the wee hours. So could you stay in the office until, say, 3 in the morning? We'll send you home in a car. You could start the Sabbath, let's say 4 a.m. Friday night, Saturday morning, and then keep it until Saturday night at 5 a.m. So you'll still have the same 25 hours. You'll just shift them over. Now, I've been a lawyer for about 5 minutes at this point. This guy's a senior partner. I'm thinking, like, how am I going to explain this to him? The only way to explain it to him was to tell him the truth and tell him what's going on. I said, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the opening scenes in the Bible. He said, yes. I said, where God creates the world in 6 days. He said, yes. I said, and then he rests on the seventh day. He said, yes, I'm familiar with that. I said, well, that's when I have to rest. It's not negotiable. I can't shift that over because God rested at the end of the 6th day. So at the end of the 6th day, when it gets dark, that's when I have to start the Sabbath. So his demeanor instantly changed. He said, I'm so sorry. I feel guilty that I even asked you the question. I would never ask you to compromise your religious beliefs. I said, you don't have to apologize. Happens to be an ingenious question. There are certain areas of flexibility. For example, I don't like to ever enter a non-kosher restaurant. First of all, I don't like to be in a room where somebody's having a better time than me. It's just uncomfortable, but sometimes I have no choice. Sometimes I'm traveling, there's no other place to meet. Sometimes it's a conference, I have to go along. So that is why God invented baseball caps and Diet Coke and a fruit plate, because that's what you do. You can have some flexibility. Can't eat the non-kosher food. Whereas here, there's no flexibility. So I explained to him that here there's no flexibility. He said, fine, I totally get it. It could also be awkward with co-religionists. You could have somebody who's Jewish and who's observant in different ways than you are. I always like to say that we're all observant. I hate when we get into these categories. I'm observant, I'm not observant. I once was in a room and people were going around the room. One person said, I'm observant. One person said, I'm conservative. One person said, I'm reformed. One guy said, I'm retired from Judaism. It's ridiculous. We're all observant. What do I mean? If there's somebody out there who considers himself non-observant, did you murder somebody today? I mean, did you bow down to an idol? There are all sorts of commandments that you observe today. Okay, so we're different levels of observance, but we're all holding somewhere in terms of our Judaism. So I was at the holiday party. This is a month or so later in the same big firm. It's really the Xmas party. They call it the holiday party. It was very nice. They got kosher food for me and the one other fellow who kept kosher. And while I was there, a partner, a more senior person with whom I had done some work, different fellow, happened to be Jewish. He says to me, Harry, I need to run to the restroom. Can you just hold my plate of food? I said, sure. So I start to reach out my hand. There are very few types of food that are recognizably not kosher. Shrimp is one of them. He starts handing me a plate filled with shrimp. And my hand recoiled in horror. I stepped back. I said, I can't hold that. He said, what's the problem? I said, it's shrimp. It's not kosher. He's like, Rothenberg, I'm not asking you to eat it. Just hold the stupid plate so I can go to the bathroom. So now I have to explain to him, there's this concept called Maris Ayin, that there might be another Jewish person, and they might see me while wearing my yarmulke, holding a plate of shrimp, and they'll assume, oh, that can't be real shrimp. It must be mock shrimp. Since it's fake shrimp, it must be okay for me to eat it, so I can eat. He's like, you know what? Spare me the Talmudic lecture. I'll find somebody else to hold it. So it can be interesting, awkward, amusing. It's fine. Explain yourself, and people, more often than not, will respect it, particularly employers who are more interested or most interested these days in honesty and loyalty and responsibility and intelligence and creativity and ingenuity, and not your 5th generation or whatever 20th generation from the Mayflower. You're just fine being visibly Jewish in today's increasingly more diverse workplaces. And sometimes it can be funny. The first very significant case I had when I went into personal injury practice involved a fellow who was rear-ended. He was stuck. He was trapped between 2 cars. Ended up getting 23 surgeries. He was crippled. It's a horrifying case. So we tried to settle it before trial, had a significant offer, but not enough. Went ahead to trial. And before trial, the judge said, I want to hold a settlement conference. So he forced the adjusters, all the lawyers, into the courtroom. We spent 2 days, and eventually we settled the case. Settled for like $6 million and $6.25 million. So after the first day of negotiations, when the offer had gone up from like $3 to $4 million, we're walking out of the courthouse, out of the courtroom, and the main defense lawyer with whom I had been litigating for the last couple of years, he had noticed something in the courtroom. He had noticed that of the approximately dozen people in the courtroom, there were 2 people who had yarmulkes on their heads. I had one on my head, and the judge had one on his head. We were in Brooklyn, New York. He was an observant Jewish judge. So this fellow Irish attorney says to me, Harry, I got to tell you something. If I had known that the judge was going to be wearing one of those beanies, I would have worn one also. I said, Jim, that's the difference between me and you. I did my homework. Why do you think I've been wearing this thing on my head all the time? So it can be amusing as well. But you have to remember that you represent something. I always tell this to people who are Sabbath observers. You have to be very, very careful. If the winter comes around and you start leaving work Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, 2:30, not I'm leaving a little early. I'm leaving at 4:45 if you're supposed to be there until 5 or 6. You're leaving at 2:30. That's really early. You don't make up that time. That's an outrage. When my first year in big firm practice, you had to share an office with somebody. So I was sharing an office with somebody who wasn't Jewish, and I always made it a point to announce Thursday night, oh, this is going to be a late night, because I wanted to make it clear that I have to make up those hours that I'm going to be missing the next day. The fact that you're observant doesn't give you the right to only work 4.5 days out of a work week and not 5 when other employees who are not Sabbath observers or not Jewish, etc., are working longer. That is a way to not to make the Jewish religion look good, but to disgrace it. And on that score, I will point out that there are constant temptations. There are temptations both in the workplace, meaning that I can tell you all sorts of, well, I'll have to do another class, and all sorts of different cases I've had. There have been enormous temptations where had we cut corners or played games or done things that were unethical or illegal, we could have made a lot more money. And I don't mean an extra 10 grand or 50 grand or 100 grand. You know, we had some cases with millions of dollars in the balance had we been willing to break or skirt the law, which we're not willing to do. And what's so important to always remember is that, like it or not, you represent the Jewish people. And no matter what situation you're in, back when I was traveling, which I assume at some point in time I'll start traveling again. It's interesting. We've been doing conferences and meetings, et cetera, as lawyers over Zoom, just like this class. But usually they're in person. My entire career they're in person. And for some reason, there's this weird thing that lawyers and people in many other professions like to do their conferences in the middle of the desert. So you get on a plane and you fly, and the next thing you know, you're looking outside and all you see is sand. And then all of a sudden you see the neon lights of the Las Vegas Strip, because so many, I would say the majority of the conferences, at least in the personal injury bar, are in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is a place on the Strip you can't go outside your room. You practically can't get off the plane without facing temptation after temptation. But you're representing the Jewish people, and you're especially if you've made a commitment to make that representation. I remember years ago, back when I was in college, I was having a conversation with a friend. One of these conversations you're having at 2 in the morning with a few people in the lounge in the floor of the dormitory, and a fellow Jewish student, a woman, said to me, I'm jealous of you. I said, why are you jealous of me? She said, because you're religious. So first of all, I wasn't so religious at the time, but I was wearing a yarmulke. I said, why do they make you jealous of me? She said, because you don't have any desires. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, you're religious. You don't have any desires. I said, oh, you're right. But you really shouldn't be jealous of me because I can't sleep at night. She said, well, why can't you sleep at night? I said, because I'm an angel. So, since I'm an angel, I have wings. So, I can't sleep on my side because then I kind of crush the wings. I can't sleep on my back because it's extremely uncomfortable. I said, what are you talking about? She thought that being religious means neutered. Like you couldn't possibly be religious if you had desires. And I explained to her, au contraire. Last time I checked, I have the same desires that any other guy has. And I can't say that I'm perfect. We do our best. But it was interesting that she saw things in that light. That you can't possibly be towing the line on these various different commandments if you have desires. And what I always try to point out to people is that, as I said before, that we're all observant, just a matter of degree. We're all Jewish, and that's not a matter of degree. I don't care how much you run from it, how little you talk about it. You do something wrong, and when the story gets written, it's going to be you're a Jew. So I'll give you an example. I'll read this to you. There was I'll read you 2 articles because they're just to show you how often this happens. When not too long ago, I don't want to say what it was for. We know what it was for. Robert Kraft, the Jewish owner of the New England Patriots, was arrested. on a particular charge. It was a very unpleasant experience for him. It was a very embarrassing moment. So I was traveling, and I got the copy of USA Today newspaper. It's very common in hotels, and they had the following article: Robert Kraft, accused of soliciting, we know what he was accused of, gave hundreds of millions to charitable causes. It's like a really weird article. Writing about a defendant that he gave money to charitable causes. Very nice, interesting. And here we go. Just weeks ago, before Robert Kraft won his 6th Super Bowl as owner of the Patriots, he was awarded perhaps a greater honor. The Genesis Prize is given to leaders of Jewish heritage who have attained international renown in their chosen professional fields and have made a significant contribution to improving the world. It's sometimes called the Jewish Nobel Prize. A Democrat, he is a longtime friend of President Donald Trump. He visited the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh last year following the mass shooting there that killed 11. Why is that relevant to the fact that he got arrested in Florida for something? A vocal supporter of Israel, Kraft has taken NFL players to the Jewish state on trips sponsored by the league. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to present the prize to Kraft. It comes with $1 million to be donated to Jewish causes. Spokeswoman for the Genesis Prize did not respond to our messages. And then later, Kraft also supports Judaic studies programs at Brandeis University, the alma mater of his late wife Myra, and has supported Jewish programs at Columbia University, his own alma mater. Neither school responded to requests for comment. So I sent this outrageous smear job about Kraft to a friend of mine who's a huge Patriots fan, who I knew would be as outraged about this as I was. And he copied me on the letter that he sent to the reporter who wrote this article. So here is his response to that article. Nice job of revealing yourself as a classic anti-Semite. Next time, make it easier. Just write, quote, Bob Kraft, accused of soliciting, you know what it was, is a Jew. I think that would do the job just as effectively and require fewer words. Keep up the good work. Because that's what it was. It was an article basically just to talk about the fact that the guy who was arrested was Jewish. And it gets worse. Michael Cohen. Now Kraft, you could say, he is more outspokenly, visibly Jewish. He gives a lot of money to Jewish causes. But Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer who was jailed, I don't remember reading any articles about him going to synagogue or wearing a yarmulke or wearing his tefillin or any other indicia of his visible Judaism. But when it came time for him to go to jail, better believe here comes the article about how Jewish Trump's lawyer was. The title of the article, this is a Reuters article, Trump's former lawyer heads to U.S. prison that offers matzo ball soup and a full-time rabbi. Oh, it is going to be just great. With a menu that includes matzo ball soup and gefilte fish, as well as a full-time rabbi and a chance of the occasional visit home. The U.S. prison where Donald Trump's former personal lawyer will spend the next few years is unique in the federal system. The 52-year-old Cohen will be housed in dorm-like accommodations at the facility's minimum security camp, which prison consultants say has become a destination for Jewish inmates due to its proximity to New York City's Jewish and upstate New York's Orthodox Jewish enclaves. Quote, he's going to what I like to refer to as Jewish heaven. And they quote some knucklehead who spent some time there. It goes on. A former manager of the prison, who now runs a prison consulting firm, said the camp was, quote, a great place for white-collar Jewish guys. Where do I sign up? I should do this as a trip with one of my friends. It sounds fantastic. Unlike most federal prisons, which periodically bring in part-time contract rabbis, Otisville has a full-time rabbi. Another thing that sets Otisville apart is the food. The availability for kosher food is much greater. The commissary menu on Otisville's website advertises matzo ball soup, gefilte fish, and rugelach, alongside Doritos tortilla chips, whatever, and Diet Sprite soda. Kosher items are marked throughout with the letter K. My mouth is watering. Now, this is ridiculous. What is the point of this article? The point of the article is to show a Jewish guy did something wrong. And he's very Jewish, Jewish, and he's going to be in jail with all those other Jews. So we do something wrong. I don't care, the Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, retired, the Chabad, the Hasidic, whether you like it or not. And people say to me, well, I don't want to represent the Jewish people. You're Jewish, you're representing the Jewish people. There's no way to get around that. And I want to tell you another story that's a painful one to tell over, but it really picks up on so many of the issues that surround the question of what's it like and what are the benefits of showing proudly, wearing your Judaism proudly in the workplace. So back in the 1970s, there was a radical group in Philadelphia called MOVE They had a building that they barricaded themselves in. They wouldn't let anybody in or out. They would walk around wearing like army wear, carrying assault rifles. They would use megaphones to scream obscenities and all sorts of stuff at all hours of day and night, basically terrorizing the neighborhood. So Frank Rizzo, who was the mayor at the time, sent in the SWAT team. The SWAT team, kicked in the front door, went door to door, and they arrested them. And there were a few broken bones, and there were some brutality lawsuits, and it was a very unpleasant situation for everybody. 10 years later, they're back. It's moved to. I don't know if it was the relatives or people who read about it and said this is a great idea. So it's the similar radical group, and they've got an apartment building, and they're not letting anybody in, and they're not letting anybody out, and they're walking around in their combat fatigues with their assault rifles, and they're terrorizing neighborhoods with their bullhorns and shouting obscenities, etc. And the mayor at this time is Wilson Good, and Good, instead of sending the SWAT team to kick the front door on, he kind of like has them lay siege to the building and results in a shootout, like a crazy situation. And there's some controversy with respect to whether he or someone else okayed it, but somebody okayed Plan B, which was to send in a police helicopter filled with explosives to drop the explosives on the roof of the building in the hope that it would start some kind of small fire, and then the people would be forced out of the building, and it's easier to arrest people who are fleeing a burning building than it is to kick in the front door and go door to door and hand-to-hand combat with people who have assault rifles. So they okay the plan, and the helicopter drops the explosives, and it works perfectly. Starts a fire. The problem is that several people in the building don't get out. They end up getting killed. Incredible tragedy. They were radical, and they were difficult, and they may have been crazy, but nobody deserves to be burned to death like that. And the fire burns down 60 adjoining homes, adjoining buildings in the neighborhood. It burns down a neighborhood. So at which point in time, the mayor is probably thinking, like, why didn't I go to any other plan but that one? So in our Philadelphia office, we start getting many, many calls from people, some who were injured and some who lost property because they lost their belongings in the fire. Now, typically, we won't handle a property damage claim. Somebody calls me up and says, I had a property damage loss. I might refer them to a colleague, but it's not typically something that we would handle. But we realized, we're getting so many of these calls, and some of them are clearly cases because of the injury cases. And let's take the property damage cases also. Instead it's the same lawsuit. Instead of having 5 plaintiffs, we'll have 50 plaintiffs. And so we end up taking many, many of these cases. So we had dozens and dozens of plaintiffs, and we put them all into the same lawsuit and sued the city of Philadelphia, in some instances for injuries, and in some instances for property damage, and in some instances for both. So the cases, at least the property damage cases, got assigned to a young lawyer in our office named David, who happened to be an observant Jew who had finished law school a couple years before. So you figure he's, 26, 27 years old, early on in his legal career. And he's assigned to, he and his paralegal, to set up the file and to prove the case. So for example, if you are handling a property damage case, you can't just say that I had a vase and it was worth $5 million because it was from the Ming Dynasty. You got to prove it up. You got to have pictures, receipts, or from Bed Bath and Beyond, whatever you have to show something. You can't just claim that you lost $100,000 worth of items in a small apartment. That doesn't sound realistic. So he was working with the clients to try to prove up their claims. Now, of course, we love all of our clients. For all I know, I can't see who's watching this. Maybe some of my clients are watching. Some of our clients we like even more. So one of these clients was calling David once a week, once every other week. When am I going to get my money? And David would say to him, to Ernest Bostic, Mr. Bostic, you got to be patient. And the next week, when am I going to get my money? And he would say, Ernest, I told you this last week and the week before, you have to be patient. We alone have 50 clients altogether. There are probably like 200 claims. It's against the city of Philadelphia. These things take time. It's going to take time. We're going to go to court. You'll have your depositions, and I'm going to send in the proof. And eventually, I'm confident that we'll settle your case. I mean, what's their defense going to be? They burnt down your neighborhood. But you have to be patient. So one day, a few months in, Bostic calls David, and he says, I settled my case. Get me my money. David says, what do you mean you settled your case? I'm your lawyer. How can you settle your case? He says, I called so-and-so, the assistant city. David says, the assistant city solicitor. He goes, yeah, that guy. And he tells him the name, and sure enough, that's the guy. It's David's counterpart, a young lawyer at City Hall, City of Philadelphia, who's representing the city of Philadelphia. So Bostic had spoken to him. He said he settled his case. So David says, okay, I'll call them up. If you settled it, I'll get your money. Fine. So David calls the assistant city solicitor, introduces himself. He says, I'm Dave from Rothenberg's firm. Says, yeah, how can I help you? He says, I understand you spoke to my client, Ernest Bostic. And the guy at City Hall says, I get Dave, I can't believe it. I made such a mistake. I have to apologize. He called me himself. So I thought he was one of the pro se litigants. Pro se is Latin for knucklehead. It's actually Latin for self-represented. That means that's the person who thinks that lawyering is a do-it-yourself job. I have this sometimes. I remember years ago I had a friend who was, was very proud of himself because he didn't hire me, and he settled the case by himself, and he was telling me, and they paid, I did it myself. They paid me, I don't know what it was, $20,000. I didn't have a heart to tell him if he had hired us, they would have paid him $250,000. It was, but some people think they know better, and it's like going to Home Depot. It's a do-it-yourself job. So he thought that because Bostic is calling him directly, he's pro se, he's self-represented. Otherwise, his lawyer would be calling. So he spoke to him. Had he known that David was his lawyer, everybody knows. Anybody who's ever picked up a book or watched a TV or a movie, a movie or a TV show knows when somebody's represented by a lawyer, you can't talk to them. So he should have checked his list and then said, I can't talk to you. You're represented by Rothenberg's firm. He didn't do that. He made a mistake. He says, David, I really apologize. I really made a mistake. David says, listen, it was an honest mistake. He did call you. You should check your list, but he did call you. He says, listen, he said he settled his case with you. Can I send you a release and you'll send me his money? So what are you talking about? I didn't settle the case with him. He says, well, what do you mean? He told me that he settled his case, and he even told me how much. He said he settled it with you for $10,000. He says, I don't believe this. He says, every time a pro se plaintiff calls me, I always ask them, how much are you looking for? And I figured maybe they're going to be tough to reach. So I want to note it in my file, or maybe they're going to change their mind and claim a different number. So I asked him, how much are you looking for? And he did. He said $10,000, and I wrote it in my file. David says, can I send you a release for $10,000? He says, Dave, you know how this works. We're going to litigate for 2 years. In 2 years, we're going to have an algorithm. We're going to have a matrix. We're going to have a graph. We're going to have a spreadsheet. This was before Excel. And we'll figure it out. Like, we'll put numbers next to each name, and we'll settle the case. But I can't settle the case now. David says, listen, you did make a mistake. You shouldn't have spoken to my client. Is there any way to make an exception? Can you get permission to settle this one case? He says, I wouldn't even know where to go. He says, this is City Hall. We got like 10 levels of bureaucracy. My supervisor. There is no possible way that I could pull one case out of the 200 cases. David says, there's no way. There's absolutely no way. Okay? So now David has to give the bad news to Ernest. He calls him up. He says, Ernest, there's a misunderstanding. You didn't settle your case. The lawyer just wanted to know how much you were looking for, so he did mark down. He noted that you're looking for $10,000, and I hope that we'll be able to get it for you. But as I've said many times before, you have to be patient. It's going to take time. There are going to be depositions. There might be motions. There are going to be court appearances. There'll be settlement conferences. You got to be patient. Bostic hangs up the phone on David and decides, oh yeah, I didn't settle my case. I'm going to go kill the lawyer at City Hall. So he buys a revolver with a sawed-off serial number, and he goes to City Hall and he signs in. The police later have the sign-in sheet in the waiting room, and it says Ernest Bostic in 12:10 p.m. And he's waiting. The assistant city solicitor is out to lunch. So he's there at 12:15, 12:20, 12:25, 12:30, sitting with a gun in his pocket, waiting to kill the guy who was out at lunch. And finally, after 20 minutes, he decides, you know what, I'm not waiting any longer. So he signs out. The police have it. 12:30, Bostic out. And he decides instead to come to our office, because he figures that, you know what, my lawyer's probably in on this anyway, so I'll go kill him instead. So he comes to our office. He knows which floor David's on because he's been there before. And he gets off the elevator. And it just happens that as he gets off the elevator, they recognize each other because David is walking by the elevator as Bostic's getting off. So they lock eyes, and Bostic reaches for the gun, and David turns around and starts running, and Bostic empties the gun. He shoots David 6 times, 6 entry wounds in his front and 6 exit wounds in his back. He collapses in cold blood. The police, like paddy wagon, arrives in front of the office before the paramedics. My father's in the back of the police wagon holding David's head above the metal floor so that it won't bang on the metal floor as they rush him to the hospital. They rush him into surgery with the chief trauma surgeon in the city of Philadelphia. He does something like 14 hours worth of microsurgery and saves his life. He lives. It's absolutely unbelievable. So at the time, I'm going to guess I'm about 18 or so. It was my parents' firm, and I had met David a couple times, not that much older than me. And I must have been home on break. I don't remember what time of year it was. I think it was in the fall, but I'm not sure. And so I said, no, I'm going to go visit him. I had a car, so I drove to the hospital. I asked my parents where he was. I drove to the hospital. And when I went in, his parents were there. It was the middle of the day, and they thanked me. They said, oh, Harry, it's so nice of you to come visit. Do you mind staying with David? We just want to go out and get some food. No problem at all. So I sit with him, and he says, he's very, very weak. So it was 2 days after it happened. And he says, I have to tell you a story. I said, I just came to visit. Like, just, tell me a story. He says, no, I have to tell you a story. I said, okay. He told me that the day after the incident, which was the day before I got there, the doctor who had done the surgery came to visit him. David says, he walked in, he told me who he was. And I said, I don't know what to say to the person who saved my life. He said, you don't have to say anything. He said, I was just doing my job. He said, I want you to understand why I'm here visiting you, because I never do this. He says, I've been doing trauma surgeries for 25 years, and I've seen it all. I've seen, beatings and electrocutions and explosions and stabbings and shootings I've seen everything, okay? At least I thought I did. And I do the surgeries, and sometimes the person doesn't make it. They die on the operating table, they don't make it. And other times the person does make it, like you. And when that happens, a different doctor takes over. I'm not your doctor anymore. All I do are the surgeries. He says, as you know, Dr. So-and-so is following you. I'm sure he's been in to see you. David says, yes. He says, so I just want to explain to you why I'm here, because I don't do this. He said, I'm here because you took 6 bullets, as you probably heard. And one of them grazed your spinal cord, and one of them grazed your heart. And had either one been any closer, you would have been paralyzed or you would have been dead. And when I say any closer, I mean any closer. If you had moved differently, if you'd been wearing any different clothing, more or less anything would have changed the trajectory of those bullets, and you'd have been dead or paralyzed. 6 bullets. In all my years, I have never seen anyone with that close a call who made it. And you are going to physically, you're going to be fine. And he was. He was fine. Okay. Mentally, obviously, I'm sure he needed counseling, etc. But physically, he says, you're going to be fine. He says, so I just wanted to tell you, young man, you had a guardian angel watching over you. So, and then he left. So David said, but there's more to the story. I didn't tell him because he's not Jewish, but I want to tell you. I said, yeah, it's a pretty crazy story already. What else? He said, that morning I left my house and I got into my car. And this was many years ago, so I have to explain this for the younger crowd out there. It used to be that when you wanted to start a car, you needed something called a key, and you had to actually put the key into the ignition and twist it in order to start the car. Now, obviously, we start the cars with our phone, or we just tell Scotty to start the engine. So he says, I went and got into my car, put the key in, turned the ignition on, I put the car in park. And I put my foot on the accelerator, I was about to drive away, and all of a sudden I said to myself, wait a minute, did I put my tzitzis on today? Because then I went like this, and felt in my shirt. I was like, I don't believe it. I forgot to put my tzitzis on. So I said to myself, Dave, you could go to work one day without your tzitzis on. So I put my foot back in the accelerator. I was about to drive away, and then I said to myself, Dave, how can you go to work without your tzitzis on? He says, I put the car in park, took the key out, took off my seatbelt, went back into my apartment, keyed in. He said, took my jacket off, took my sports jacket or suit jacket off, took my tie off, took my shirt off, put on my heavy wool pair of tzitzis, put my shirt back on, my tie back on, my suit jacket back on, my coat back on, and I went to work. He's like, Harry, the doctor said to me, anything different in your clothing? I was like, Dave, I got it. Now I'll tell you 2 things. Number 1, there was no doubt in my mind that although I was wearing my yarmulke when I went to visit him, there's no way I was wearing my tzitzis. It was not something I was particularly careful about when I was a teenager. I can tell you number 2, that after hearing that story, unless, and this was many, many years ago, unless I am in the shower or the swimming pool, you can come check, like the rabbis used to do in day school. They used to come, pretend they were giving me a little affectionate, pat on the back when they were going like this, check if I was wearing tzitzis. You can come do that test. I'm going to be wearing my tzitzis. Now, I'm not telling you, it's a dangerous story. I'm not telling you the story to suggest that, guys, you put your tzitzis on, Kevlar body armor. You are protected. It's a crazy world out there. It's like Captain America's shield. I mean, nothing's getting, you'd be laughable, I'll tell you that. There are obviously Israeli soldiers who have been killed in battle while wearing their tzitzis. There are Israeli and other civilians who have been killed in terror attacks. Go look at Pittsburgh. It was in Shul. Go look in California. So I'm not suggesting to you that if you put your tzitzis on, you automatically have protection. What I am suggesting to you, what I'm introducing, is the following concept, which I think fits nicely with respect to bringing your Judaism into the workplace, is that it's very possible that just as David, it was clear as day that he did something extra that day for God, and God did something extra for him. So it's very possible that that's the case. that when you do something extra for God, every one of us is on some issue. Again, forget what you call yourself, observant, not observant. There's some issue in your Judaism that you're on the fence about. Every one of us. There might be somebody out there who's thinking, I'm thinking I might want to, start keeping kosher. Somebody else I think I might want to start eating a Friday night dinner. Somebody else might think, I think I want to start, studying Jewish texts. Somebody else might be thinking, I want to start, the laws of family purity, mikvahs. So like everybody's thinking about something. And who knows, maybe you do something extra for God, He does something extra for you. And I ask you, is it crazy to suggest that? Is it? Like, imagine, I always use this example, because to me it's compelling. You're walking, wherever you're walking. You get outside your house, everybody should be able to get out soon, I hope, post-COVID and back to normal. Although I hope each of us doesn't go back to normal. I hope we've improved as people and got closer to God. But you're out, you're walking, and while you're walking, somebody's carrying one of those, is wheeling one of those big wheeled duffel bags, and they're not paying attention. They're texting, and they're WhatsApping, they're live streaming on their phone, and they're not looking, and they knock you down to the ground with their bag as you pass by them. So as you get up, you turn around, and before you even say anything, the guy who knocked you down turns around and is like, you got a problem? You got a problem with that? Like, starts up with you. I know what my reaction is going to be. It's a fist fight. Like, dude, you knock me down and then you mouth off to me? Guy's getting pounded. So now imagine you get your destination, wherever it is you're going to. You're going to the office, you're going to a class, you're going to a meeting, you're going to wherever you're going to, dinner. You finish. It's an hour later, it's 8 hours later, whatever it is. And you're walking again. And somebody else is distracted and they're pulling another one of these wheelie bags, or they got a big backpack over one shoulder, and they're texting, they're not paying attention, and they knock you down to the ground. So this time, first of all, as you're falling, you're like, what's going on today? Why does everybody keep knocking me down today? But this time, remembering what happened before, you already got your fists ready as you jump up. But in contrast to the first guy, the second guy who knocked you down was like, I'm so sorry, runs over, helps you up. He's like, I'm such a klutz, I was being a bitch, I feel terrible, I hope you're okay. What's your reaction going to be? At most, you're going to say, just be more careful next time. You might not even say that. You might just say, dude, it's fine, don't worry about it. Now, if somebody's watching both these scenes, it's a silent movie, right? And they see you. First time, you get knocked down, you get up, and you pound the guy into the pavement. Second time, you get knocked down, you get up, you're like, wow. They're looking at you like, what's going on? Schizophrenia? Like, well, why the massive difference in reactions? And we know what's going on. For those of us who have sound, you're just mirroring. The first guy was obnoxious and was aching for a breaking, and so you gave it to him. Second guy acted perfectly appropriately. So why is it crazy to think that if somebody does something extra for God, I picture in that scene with David, God's up in heaven, okay? And David's saying to himself, I can go to work one day. Come on, David, you go to work one day. He says, you know what? No, I can't. I can't go to work without my tzitzis. So I'm going to get out of my car. I'm going to get undressed. I'm going to get redressed again. And God's up there in heaven going, like to the angels, Gabe, Mike, Rafe, did you see what that guy just did? That guy just got undressed, put his tzitzis on, got redressed, got back into his car. For me, later today, if he needs me, even if it's 6 bullets, I got this. And so I ask you, is it crazy to think that you do something extra for the man upstairs who loves you more than anybody, loves you more than your spouse, more than your kids, more than your significant other, more than your bubby, more than anybody, and sees you doing something extra or doing extra things for him? He may well do extra things for you. So I wish everyone the best of luck in their Jewish journey. I don't mean to make it sound easy. As I said, there can be times that are awkward. There can be times that are uncomfortable. There can be times that are embarrassing. There can be times that are funny. There can be times that are horrifying. And these times can often push us out of our comfort zone. It's maybe uncomfortable, especially for those of you who are growing, and maybe you are getting more visibly Jewish, and that creates more questions, etc. And you don't need all the answers. It's perfectly fine if somebody asks you a question and you don't have the answer, to say, that's a great question, let me research it and I'll get back to you. People will respect the honesty. And I know it sounds weighty telling you that you're representing the Jewish people, but you are. And so, like it or not, I want to wish you the best of luck, because each one of you is representing all of us. So let's all represent together in a respectable way, in a dignified way, in a way that brings honor and respect to the Jewish people and to God. And thank you very much for listening. And be well, everybody, and stay safe.